We're going to continue to look at the use of proteins and in particular enzymes in the home and in industry, and we're going to look at the uses for different enzymes in these two areas. Now the first thing is that we know that some microorganisms can produce enzymes, and these enzymes pass out of the cells of the actual microbe. So you can imagine this is a simple diagram of a bacterium. It produces certain enzymes and these actually pass out of the cell. Okay, now if you take that idea that these bacteria are producing enzymes, we can actually grow a whole bunch of these and then collect the enzymes that are produced. Now this is actually done in what we call a fermenter. This is a fermenter or a fermentation vessel, and all it is a container that contains the bacteria that you want. So here's the bacteria. We just put a whole bunch of those in there. We give them some nutrients to grow off. We have a little stirrer that keeps everything nice and even. We monitor temperature and things like that, and these bacteria will grow. They will produce these enzymes, and then we just purify the enzyme, and we can use them for various uses. Now to start us off with enzymes in the home, the main one that you really need to know about is the use of enzymes in biological detergents. This is washing powder in particular. It can be they can be found in dishwashing powder, but generally we look at washing powder that's used to clean our clothes. The two main types that we look at are these ones called protease and lipase, and protease are enzymes that can digest protein. So any stain or any mark you have on your clothes that's protein based, often found in food, can very easily be removed by these protease enzymes. Lipase is another type of enzyme, and this will break down any fat or oil based stain or mark that you might have on your clothes. Now the great advantage of using these is that they are effective at low temperatures. Usually enzymes work best at around 35 degrees C, and often you'll see on the instructions for these washing powders to keep the temperature low, because if you go above a certain temperature, above around about 40, often these enzymes will, what we call, denature, and that's explained in a previous video, but it means they won't work anymore. So biological detergents is the main use in the home. Protease and lipase destroy these kinds of or break down these kinds of stains. There are other types of enzyme as well. We have carbohydrate ones and other ones called cellulase, and they all have a job of breaking down certain types of stain or actually improving the quality of the clothes, but these are the two key ones mentioned in the spec. Okay, now the next thing we're going to look at is the use of enzymes in industry. Now in the old spec this used to be on the higher tier, but for this one it's actually on the foundation tier, so you do need to know this. There are three uses that we'll go through briefly, and then we'll look at advantages and disadvantages. Now the first one here is we've got an example of some baby food. And baby food often contains protein, which is required for the growth of the baby, but the protein exists in great big long chains, and these individual shapes here, you might know what they are. Write a comment below, see if you can tell me what these are, and I'll let you know whether you're right or not. But proteins are made of great big long chains of these individual units, and it takes time to digest, and it's quite hard for babies to digest this complicated or long chain protein. So what manufacturers do is they add enzyme called protease. Again, it breaks down proteins. It makes it from long chains into much shorter chains. So we say the protein has been pre-digested, and this is much easier for the baby to digest. So that's the first use. Now the second use is to produce what we call sugar syrup, and we produce this from a substance called starch, and starch again is made of great big long chains of these individual sugar units, and if we break it down, we can make it into these individual units, and these in fact are glucose, but we can make that into sugar syrup, and this sugar syrup can be used as a sweetener in food. And the particular group of enzymes that we use for this are called carbohydrates. Now you've heard all these names before if you've looked at the digestion video, and they're the very similar type of enzymes that we use for these uses. So starch, long chain molecule, broken down by an enzyme called carbohydrates into sugar syrup, which can be used as a food additive or a sweetener. The last one that we want to look at, and this is quite an obscure one, but they do often, or sometimes should I say, surprise you in the exam. They ask you this obscure question of what kind of enzyme is used to convert glucose syrup into fructose syrup. So I want you to try and remember this name quite carefully. The enzyme is called isomerase, and what it does, it converts glucose into this substance called fructose. Now these are both types of sugar, but the advantage for converting those is that fructose syrup, or the sugar fructose, is much sweeter than glucose. So it contains roughly the same calories, but it's much sweeter. So that means you can use much less of it in your food and achieve the same kind of sweetness, and that means it can be used in slimming or diet foods. We use much less of the fructose, and therefore less calories in the food. Now remember, the name of the enzyme is isomerase. I've seen this come up a couple of times, and it's one of those little small points in the spec that's easily forgotten, but as we know, every single mark counts. Now the last thing I want to go through briefly is the advantages and disadvantages of the use of enzyme in industry. Now the first one is that, well, with enzymes we can have reactions at low temperature and low pressure. That means we can use less energy in terms of producing the product that we're trying to produce. It's important that you are able to put these explanations together like this. So why are enzymes good in industry? Well, we can have reactions at low temperature and pressure, and this here is a linking word, or a connective we call it, and therefore less energy is used. And being able to do this is important because we are using a connective to explain in a logical order, and as you know, this is often a skill that's marked in the exam, especially for the new spec. What's the good point about you having less energy or using less energy? Well, the first thing obviously is it's cheaper, but of course it helps the environment. Less energy used means ultimately less CO2 emissions. The other advantage of these enzymes is that they can be reused over and over again. If you're careful with them and look after them, you can use them again and again. On the disadvantage side, well, it does cost a lot to produce these enzymes. If you remember back to that first slide, we had a whole fermentation system set up, and this does cost a bit of money to produce or to do this process, so it's a costly process. And the other thing is that the enzymes, if you're not careful, if your temperatures go too high, you will denature those enzymes, and all that money you spent on producing them or buying them in the first place will be wasted because a high temperature has destroyed them. Okay, so that's an overview of the use of enzymes in the home and industry, and I'll see you again soon.